Wanda Maximoff, from Avenger to Scarlet Witch. Wanda's transformation is perhaps the most heartbreaking fall from grace in the entire MCU. She started as a hero, fighting alongside the Avengers to save the world from Ultron, but grief has a way of twisting even the purest souls. After losing Vision in Infinity War, then watching him die again in Endgame, Wanda's pain became unbearable. The creation of the Hex in Westview seemed innocent at first, a grieving woman creating a fantasy world to cope with loss. But she was literally mind-controlling an entire town, forcing thousands of people to live out her sitcom fantasy while they screamed inside their own heads. The children begged her to let their mother out of her prison. Families were torn apart, held hostage by Wanda's inability to let go. Even after releasing Westview, her descent wasn't over. The Darkhold corrupted what remained of her sanity, transforming her from a broken hero into the Scarlet Witch, a villain willing to murder anyone who stood between her and her children. She hunted America Chavez across the multiverse, slaughtered the Illuminati without hesitation, and nearly destroyed multiple realities in her quest. This wasn't mind control or external influence. This was Wanda choosing her pain over everyone else's lives. What makes her fall so tragic is that she was right to grieve. She'd lost everything: her parents, her brother, her home, her lover, her children. But somewhere along the way, her grief became selfishness, and her magic became a weapon against innocence. By the time she collapsed Mount Wundagore, destroying every copy of the Darkhold across the multiverse, the damage was done. She'd become the very thing she once fought against. Helmut Zemo, the man who destroyed the Avengers. Zemo never had powers, never wore a suit, never threw a single punch at an Avenger. Yet he accomplished what Ultron, Loki, and countless others couldn't. He destroyed the Avengers from within. His origin as a villain is complex because he didn't start evil. He was a Sokovian intelligence officer, a family man, a husband and father who loved his country. Then Ultron happened. The Battle of Sokovia killed his father, his wife, and his young son. They died because the Avengers were cleaning up their own mess, collateral damage in a fight between gods. Zemo's revenge was methodical and brilliant. He knew he couldn't beat the Avengers physically, so he attacked them psychologically. He leaked information about the Winter Soldier's victims, knowing it would lead to the Sokovia Accords. He framed Bucky for a terrorist attack, knowing Tony would hunt him. He orchestrated everything so that Tony would discover that Bucky, Steve's best friend, had murdered his parents. Standing in that Siberian bunker, Zemo watched with quiet satisfaction as Iron Man and Captain America tore each other apart. He didn't need to throw a punch, he just needed to show them a video. The beauty of Zemo's villainy is that he was technically right about everything. The Avengers did operate without oversight. They did cause massive collateral damage. They did make decisions that affected millions without accountability. His methods were villainous, but his motivation came from a place of genuine loss and legitimate criticism. Even in The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, when he helped stop the Flag Smashers, he remained a villain, one who believed the world was better off without super soldiers, without heroes who thought they were above the law. Zemo represents the villain created not by evil, but by the hero's own failures. Every death in Sokovia was on the Avengers' hands, and Zemo made sure they never forgot it. Tony Stark, the architect of Ultron. Tony Stark has saved the world multiple times, but he's also nearly destroyed it. His transformation into a temporary villain didn't happen overnight. It was a gradual descent fueled by fear, trauma, and an overwhelming need to protect everyone, even if it meant controlling them. After the Battle of New York, Tony developed severe PTSD. He couldn't sleep, couldn't stop seeing that portal in the sky, couldn't shake the knowledge that threats far beyond Earth's capability were out there waiting. This fear drove him to create Ultron. He didn't consult the other Avengers. He didn't consider the ethical implications. He just did it, convinced that his intellect and his fear gave him the right to make decisions for the entire planet. The result was a genocidal AI that lifted an entire city into the sky and tried to cause an extinction-level event. Thousands died because Tony Stark thought he knew better than everyone else. And the worst part? He didn't really learn from it. In Civil War, Tony supported the Sokovia Accords, but his motivations were selfish, assuaging his guilt by accepting government oversight. When that wasn't enough, when he discovered Bucky killed his parents, Tony became a villain again. He tried to murder Bucky in cold blood, not for justice, but for revenge. Steve had to fight his teammate, his friend, to prevent Tony from executing a brainwashed man who had no control over his actions. Even his creation of Edith, a satellite weapon system given to a teenager, showed that Tony never really stopped playing God. He built a weapon system that could kill anyone, anywhere, at any time, and thought putting it in a pair of glasses was responsible. Peter Parker nearly caused massive casualties in London because Tony thought a grief-stricken kid should have access to orbital strike drones. Tony's villainy wasn't about wanting to hurt people. It was about his inability to trust anyone else to save the world. His ego, his trauma, and his genius combined into a toxic mixture that repeatedly put everyone at risk. He was a hero, yes, but he was also the villain who thought he had to save humanity, even if humanity didn't want to be saved his way. Steve Rogers, Captain Hypocrite. Steve Rogers is supposed to be the moral center of the MCU, the man out of time with old-fashioned values and an unshakable moral compass. But in Civil War, Steve became the villain by putting his personal loyalty above the greater good. When the Sokovia Accords were proposed, requiring superhero oversight, Steve refused, not because the Accords were inherently wrong, but because they might prevent him from saving Bucky. Steve's argument against the Accords sounds noble. What if they send us somewhere we don't want to go or don't send us somewhere we need to be? But strip away the rhetoric and it's just a man saying, "I don't want anyone telling me what to do." The Avengers had operated without oversight and caused massive civilian casualties. The world had a legitimate reason to demand accountability. Steve's response was essentially, "Trust me, I know best," which is exactly the kind of thinking that created Ultron. His protection of Bucky makes it even worse. Yes, Bucky was brainwashed and not responsible for his actions. But Steve knew Bucky had killed Tony's parents and hid it. He looked Tony in the eye, his teammate, his friend, and lied by omission. When Tony found out, Steve chose Bucky over the Avengers, over their friendship, over everything they'd built together. In that Siberian bunker, Steve became the villain. A man who valued one friendship over the team, over the world, over basic honesty. The consequences were catastrophic. The Avengers split apart. When Thanos came, Earth's mightiest heroes were scattered, weakened, unprepared. You could argue that if Steve had compromised, if he'd found a middle ground, maybe they would have been united enough to stop Thanos before the snap. Half the universe died, and while Thanos wielded the gauntlet, Steve's self-righteousness helped pave the way. Even his final act, staying in the past with Peggy, was selfish. He abandoned Sam, Bucky, and a world that needed Captain America because he wanted his dance. He created an alternate timeline or changed his own, either way abandoning his principles for personal happiness. The man who always preached about sacrifice ultimately couldn't sacrifice his own desires. Loki, the god of redemption's reversals. Loki's story is complicated because he keeps switching sides. He started as Thor's brother and Asgard's prince before discovering he was actually a frost giant, the very monsters Asgardians feared. This identity crisis triggered his first villainous turn. He tried to destroy Jotunheim to prove his loyalty to Asgard, nearly killing Thor in the process. His motivation was understandable, a desperate need to belong, to prove he was worthy of Odin's love, but his methods were genocidal. After falling into the void, Loki encountered Thanos and became even worse. The attack on New York killed hundreds of people. He mind-controlled Hawkeye and dozens of agents, forcing them to kill their own colleagues. He tried to enslave all of humanity because he believed people wanted to be ruled. This wasn't just a villain, this was a tyrant who thought subjugation was a kindness. But here's where Loki gets interesting. He kept oscillating between hero and villain. In the Dark World, he helped Thor save the universe, seemingly sacrificing himself. But he also faked his death and impersonated Odin, leaving Asgard vulnerable to Hela. His selfish desire to rule directly led to Asgard's destruction and the deaths of thousands. In Ragnarok and Infinity War, Loki finally seemed to complete his redemption arc, dying heroically while trying to save Thor from Thanos. But the Loki series revealed countless variants, many of whom remained villains throughout their timelines. The sacred timeline's Loki may have found redemption, but infinite other Lokis across the multiverse continued their villainous ways, proving that heroism wasn't inevitable for him. It was a choice he had to make over and over. John Walker, Captain America's Dark Mirror. John Walker represents what happens when you give power and responsibility to someone who wants the glory more than the duty. The government chose him to be the new Captain America after Steve Rogers retired, and at first, Walker seemed like a legitimate hero. He was a decorated soldier, a Medal of Honor recipient, someone who'd served his country with distinction. But the pressure of living up to Steve Rogers' legacy combined with Walker's own insecurities created a powder keg waiting to explode. Walker's descent began with good intentions. He wanted to be worthy of the shield, wanted to protect people, wanted to make America proud, but he also wanted recognition, wanted respect, wanted people to see him as equal to Steve Rogers. When he and Lamar Hoskins fought the Flag Smashers, Walker wasn't prepared for how outmatched he was. Super soldiers were stronger, faster, better than him despite all his training and medals. This inadequacy drove him to take the super soldier serum. He told himself it was necessary, that he needed it to protect people, but really he needed it to protect his ego. The serum amplified everything inside him, his aggression, his insecurity, his need for validation. When the Flag Smashers killed Lamar, the serum's effects combined with his rage created a monster. Walker chased down Nico, one of the Flag Smashers, and executed him in broad daylight in a public square. With Captain America's shield, on camera, in front of dozens of witnesses, that moment transformed Walker from a struggling hero into a villain. Nico was surrendering, pleading for his life, and Walker beat him to death in a berserker rage. The super soldier serum that made Steve Rogers a better man made John Walker a killer. He'd become what he feared most, someone unworthy of the title he'd been given. Even after being stripped of the Captain America mantle, Walker's villainy continued. He built his own shield, took on the identity of U.S. agent, and aligned himself with Valentina Allegra de Fontaine, a woman clearly operating outside legal boundaries. Walker represents the villain created by pressure, inadequacy, and the toxic need to prove worth through violence. The Eternals, cosmic betrayers. The Eternals present a unique case because they were villains from the start. They just didn't know it. For thousands of years, they believed they were heroes protecting humanity from the deviants. They saved civilizations, advanced human progress, and guided mankind's development. Circe, Icarus, Athena, and the others genuinely thought they were doing good. Then they discovered the truth. They were only protecting humanity so humans could multiply enough for the emergence. The emergence would birth a new celestial, but it would destroy Earth in the process. Every human saved, every civilization protected, every advancement encouraged. It was all just farming humanity for enough population energy to birth a god. The Eternals' entire existence was a lie. They weren't heroes, they were gardeners, and humanity was the crop. When confronted with this truth, the Eternals split. Icarus chose to remain loyal to Arishem and the Celestials, making him the villain. He'd loved Circe for thousands of years, had protected humanity, had been their greatest champion. But when forced to choose between Earth and his cosmic purpose, Icarus chose his programming. He attacked his own family, tried to kill Circe, and nearly allowed the emergence to proceed. What makes Icarus's villainy so tragic is that he'd known the truth for centuries. He knew when he helped build civilizations that they were doomed. He knew when he fought alongside his family that he'd eventually have to stop them. He even drove Ajax to her death when she decided to save humanity. Icarus lived with this guilt for hundreds of years, playing the hero while knowing he was actually the villain, and when the moment came, he still chose cosmic duty over love. The other Eternals who chose to save Earth became villains in the eyes of the Celestials. They betrayed their creators, defied their programming, and stopped the birth of a new god. From Arishem's perspective, they're rebels and traitors. The Eternals prove that heroism and villainy depend entirely on perspective. Are you a hero for saving your planet, or a villain for preventing the birth of something greater? Karli Morgenthau, the revolutionary turned terrorist. Karli Morgenthau's transformation from hero to villain perfectly illustrates how good intentions can lead to evil actions. During the blip, when half of humanity vanished, Karli emerged as a genuine hero. She helped refugees, united displaced people, and created the Flag Smashers, an organization dedicated to a world without borders. When everyone returned after the blip, Karli fought to maintain that unity, to keep the progress they'd made during those 5 years. Her cause was noble. The GRC was forcibly relocating refugees, tearing apart communities that had formed during the blip, prioritizing the returned over those who'd survived. Karli saw injustice and fought against it, but somewhere along the way, her methods became radicalized. She stole super soldier serum and distributed it to her followers. She attacked GRC facilities. She started killing people. The turning point came when Carly bombed a GRC supply depot, murdering 11 people, including Lamar Hoskins. These weren't soldiers or politicians. Many were just workers trying to help with the resettlement. Carly had crossed the line from freedom fighter to terrorist. She told herself it was necessary, that you couldn't make an omelet without breaking eggs, but she'd become exactly what she claimed to oppose, someone willing to kill innocents for her vision of a better world. What makes Carly's villainy so tragic is that she was partially right. The GRC's policies were cruel and short-sighted. The world did abandon the people who'd survived the blip, but being right about the problem doesn't justify murder as a solution. Sam Wilson tried to reach her, tried to show her a better way, but Carly was too far gone. She died a villain, killed by Sharon Carter, never realizing that her methods had betrayed everything she claimed to believe in. Quentin Beck, Mysterio's master manipulation. Quentin Beck never had a traditional hero phase, but the world believed he was one, which makes his villainy even more insidious. He introduced himself as a hero from another dimension, fighting the elementals to save Earth. Spider-Man trusted him, Nick Fury trusted him, the entire world celebrated him as the next great superhero. But it was all a lie from the beginning. Beck was a disgruntled Stark Industries employee, a brilliant inventor whose holographic technology Tony had dismissed and repurposed. Tony's casual cruelty, calling Beck's life's work barf, might seem minor, but it destroyed Beck's career and dignity. In Beck's mind, he was the victim of a hero's arrogance, and he wasn't entirely wrong. Tony Stark did have a history of using people and discarding them when they were no longer useful, but Beck's response crossed every line. He assembled a team of ex-Stark employees, each with their own grudges, and created an elaborate deception. The elementals were holograms, his heroism was staged, everything was designed to make him look like the next Iron Man so he could steal Edith and gain control of a global weapons network. He manipulated a grieving teenager, exploited Peter Parker's desire for a mentor, and nearly got thousands of people killed in London with his fake disasters. When Peter discovered the truth, Beck's villainy escalated. He used Edith's drones to try to murder a 16-year-old kid. He manipulated video footage to frame Spider-Man for his own crimes. His final act, revealing Peter Parker's identity to the world, destroyed an innocent person's life out of pure spite. Beck died a villain, but his actions continued to hurt Peter long after, leading directly to the events of No Way Home. Beck represents the villain created by a hero's carelessness. Tony Stark probably never thought twice about dismissing Beck's work, but that dismissal radicalized a man who had the intelligence and resources to become genuinely dangerous. It's a reminder that heroes have a responsibility not just in their big actions, but in how they treat everyone around them. Doctor Strange, Supreme Sorcerer, Supreme Threat. Doctor Strange became a villain in the multiverse, just not in the main MCU timeline. In Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, we saw what happened when Strange's arrogance and need for control went unchecked. Multiple variants of Strange across different universes became villains, each following the same pattern. A good man corrupted by his inability to accept that he couldn't save everyone. The most notable villainous Strange was the one from the universe where he lost Christine. Unable to accept her death, he used the Darkhold to dreamwalk across universes, searching for a reality where they could be together. This led to incursions, collisions between universes that destroyed entire realities. Strange's selfish desire to be with Christine literally erased billions of lives across multiple universes. He became so corrupted that he grew a third eye, a physical manifestation of his moral degradation. Another variant, the Strange who caused an incursion trying to defeat Thanos, chose to use the Darkhold to stop it. The book corrupted him completely, transforming him into a demon-like creature covered in souls of the damned. He became the very thing he'd fought against, a monster willing to sacrifice anything for what he deemed the greater good. Even in the main timeline, Strange's tendencies toward villainy show through. In No Way Home, he was willing to cast a spell that could fracture the multiverse because a kid asked him to. He didn't think it through, didn't consider the consequences, just assumed his magic could fix Peter's problem. When it went wrong, Strange's first instinct was to send every multiversal visitor back to their deaths rather than try to save them. Peter had to fight him to protect people Strange had written off as acceptable casualties. Strange represents the villain hiding inside every hero. The person who thinks they know best, who makes decisions for others without their consent, who uses power to enforce their vision of right and wrong. Across the multiverse, nearly every version of Stephen Strange eventually became a villain because his core character flaw, arrogance disguised as confidence, led him to cross lines that should never be crossed. These stories remind us that heroism isn't a permanent state. It's a choice made every day in every moment, and even the greatest heroes can fall when they lose sight of what they're fighting for. The scariest villains in the MCU aren't the aliens or the gods. They're the heroes who thought they were doing the right thing, right up until the moment they became the very thing they swore to destroy. So, what do you think? Which hero's fall hit you the hardest? Are any of these villains redeemable, or did they cross lines that can't be uncrossed? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into the MCU's darkest corners. See you in the next video.